Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Yud Bet, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbaev and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. This Mishnah states the minimum amounts for the Menacha of plowing and related Melachot. The Mishnah begins, Ahoresh Kol Shehu. One who plows any amount of land is liable because it makes that area fit for planting a single seed. Hamnakesh, one who weeds between plants, thereby improving their growth, which Mefarshim explain is a tolada of zoeh, planting, which includes any action that improves the growth of a plant. Vam karsem, vam zared, and one who cuts dead branches or excess shoots from a tree, both of which improve the growth of the tree. Kolshu Hayav, in any amount, he is liable. And the Mefarshim explain, in the case of one who cuts dead branches or excess shoots from a tree, too many shoots growing out of a tree can weaken it, and since removing dead branches or excess roots strengthens the tree, these actions are toladot of planting. Now the Mishnah says Kolshu Hayav, even if it's any amount, he is liable, meaning even if he removes a single small weed, twig, or shoot, he is liable for the melacha of planting because that's enough to improve the growth of the plants. Hamlaket etzim, the law of one who gathers wood by cutting branches off a tree depends on his intent. Im litaken, if he intends to improve the tree, kol shehen, he is liable for cutting off any amount of wood. Now, any melacha, the Mefarshim explained, done to improve the growth of a tree is a tolada of planting, for which there is no minimum amount, like we just learned. Now the same applies, the Rav says, where his intent in removing the dead branches is to improve the soil. This is a tolada of planting, for which there's also no minimum amount. So again, the Mishnah says, Hamlaket etzim, one who gathers wood by cutting branches off a tree, im letaken, if his intention is to improve the tree, kol shehen, he is liable for cutting off any amount of wood, im lehesek, but if he intends to obtain wood for burning, kedei levashel betza kala, he is liable only if he cuts off enough wood to cook an easily cooked egg, which Mefarshim explain. If his purpose is to obtain wood, the melacha is kotzer, reaping. Now the melacha of reaping is removing a living plant or part of one from its place of growth for the sake of using it. Now in the case of harvesting firewood, the minimum considered significant is enough to cook a chicken egg, which is more easily cooked than all other eggs. Now, one need not collect enough wood to cook the entire egg. As long as he has enough to cook a portion the size of a dried fig, the Rav says, he is liable. Now, the size of a dried fig is generally the measure that is considered significant for melachot that involve the preparation of food. And that's why the Rav says, as long as it's enough to cook a portion the size of a dried fig, you are already liable. Hamlaket asavim, one who gathers grasses by uprooting them from the ground. That also depends on his intent. Im letaken, if he intends to improve the soil, kol shehu, he is liable for uprooting any amount. Now, any action intended to improve the soil, making it better for planting, is a tolada of choresh, plowing. And like the Mishnah taught, one is liable for any amount of plowing. Im libhema, but if his intent is to obtain feed for an animal, kimlo fia gedi, he is liable only if he gathers enough to fill the mouth of a young goat. Now, if his purpose is to obtain grass, the melacha is reaping. Now, when harvesting grass, one is not liable unless he detaches enough to fill a young goat's mouth. A young goat, the Mefarshim explain, is the smallest animal to which one feeds grass, and so a young goat's mouthful is the smallest amount that is considered significant, like we learned in chapter 7, Mishnah 4. And that is the end of Mishnah Bet. We'll continue now Mishnah Gimel, which involves the melacha of writing. Hakotev shte otiyot, if one writes two letters, ben bimino, ben bismolo, whether with his right hand or with his left hand, and the Mefarshim explain, the Mishnah is referring to a person who can comfortably write with either his right hand or his left hand, ambidextrous. A right-handed person, however, is liable only for writing with his right hand, not his left. And a left-handed person is liable only for writing with his left hand, not his right. writing with the wrong hand, so to speak, is an unusual act as a shinui, which is not biblically prohibited, and therefore he's not subject to liability, but it's still a sumi d'Rabbanan, it's still forbidden under rabbinic law. So when the Mishnah says ben bimino, ben bismalo, whether with his right hand or his left, and that's talking about an ambidextrous person who's comfortable, who can comfortably write with either his right or left hand. The Mishnah continues ben mishem echad, whether the two letters are the same character, such as Aleph, Aleph. Now, although the letters Aleph, Aleph do not form a word, a person doesn't have to write a complete word in order to be liable. Ben Mishneh Shemot, the Mishnah continues, are two different characters, such as Aleph Bet. Ben Mishneh Samaniyot, whether he writes them with one or two types of inks. Bechol Lashon, whether he writes them in Hebrew script or in the script of any other language. Hayav, he is liable. Amar Rabbi Yossi said, Lo chivu shte otiyot ele mishum roshem. When they said that one who writes two letters is liable, they meant that he is liable only for marking. Shekach hayu chotvin al karshei mishkan leda ezu ben zugo. Because this is what they would do in the Mishkan. They would write marks on each of the boards of the Mishkan in order to know which one is its partner when they had to reassemble them. And the Mefarshim explain, the Levim would mark each board in the Mishkan so that they would know which board went next to which. So in this way, when they put the Mishkan together again after traveling, they could put the boards back in the right order. So Rabbi Yossi learns from this that the essence of the Melacha is not writing, but making marks. When one writes two letters on Shabbat, he is liable not because they are letters of an accepted language, but because they are marks that mean something to him. Therefore, one is liable even if he did not write letters, but only marks, such as a line drawn by a workman to mark points in his work, as the Rab says. Now, the first Tana, however, holds that the Levim wrote letters on the boards for this purpose and not marks, and therefore the first Tana holds we can derive from the Mishkan only that one's liable for making letters. And the Rav does tell us, Ven alachat Rabbi Yossi, the alachat does not follow Rabbi Yossi. The Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi said, now the Art School Elucidator points out that the text in Bavli and all the Rishonim reads Rabbi Yehuda. But our Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi said, Matzinu Shem Katan Mishem Gadol. We find that one is liable for writing a short word that is part of a long word, meaning even if one intended to write a long word, but stopped after the first two letters and they form a short word, he is liable. Shem, Shimon, Shmuel. For example, he wrote only Shem, Shinmen, from Shimon, or Shmuel, both which start with Shin Mem. Noach, Minachor. He wrote Nunchet, Noach, from the name Nachor. Dan, mi Daniel. He wrote Dan, from Daniel. Gad, mi Gadiel, or Gad, from Gadiel. Now the Mefarshim explain, as long as the two letters that he did write form a complete name, he is liable even though he intended to write more than two letters. Now, although in the first example, he wrote mem, which is the form used in the middle of a word, and not mem sofit, the form used at the end of the word. So when you spell Shem, he wrote Shin Mem, but not Mem Sofit. He wrote a regular Mem, and that's not how you spelled the name Shem. He's still liable for writing a complete word. Now, this Tana follows the opinion that if the regular Mem is written at the end of a word in the Sefer Torah is kosher. Therefore, in his view, even a word that ends with a regular Mem is viewed as complete, as the Gemara explains on page 103b in Masechet Shabbat. Now, we said Rabbi Yehuda, he agrees that if he had intended to write only two letters in the first place, he is liable for any two letters, as the first Tana taught. Now, his point is that where he intended to write more than two letters, he is not liable for writing just two unless they form a complete word, as the Mefarshim explained to us. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen. But also, before we conclude, to point out, the Rav does say, V'chen halacha. This is actually the halacha according to the Rav Vadim Bartenura. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.